And now the moment you've all been waiting for. Mutageosilus arneopolis. Self-replicating mucus.
My God. They're really from another world.
And they're going to want to meet the man that flew that warp ship.
Sound off!
Duty, honor, service!
Louder!
Duty, honor, service!
Pitiful.
Live long and prosper.
You, girl with the face, begging to be singled out. Why do physics hate me?
Because you're not supposed to be here.
Thumbs up for listening.
Board their ship! Take everything you can!
You gotta go. I envy you. The world you're going to.
I envy you. Taking these first steps into a new frontier.
Regard to Enterprise. Energize.
You know, when I went to sleep last night, I thought I had seen all the critique videos I was going to see. All the major players had already put out their videos. All the major players had said what basically every other one of them had said. And I figured that was it. But man, I was wrong. Everywhere I look on YouTube, I'm getting recommended more and more critique videos. And they're just multiplying faster than tribbles in a grain silo. Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Rings of Power, The Acolyte, She-Hulk, Ironheart, Batwoman. I don't even know. Like, none of these shows have gotten this much critique, and especially not after 1 or 2 episodes. If you're in Hollywood, if you're in the writer's room, I don't know if you could get a better wake-up call. Because this is proof that you need to know what you're doing and what history came before you got to the room. So, this episode was about the Betazoids coming to rejoin Starfleet. We're going to look at what they did and what they could have done if anyone in the writer's room had taken the job seriously. So, just quick little recap of episode 2 in case you haven't seen it. Starfleet is super jazzed because Betazoid, or Betaz, I'm not exactly sure which one is which, Betaz has reached out and they're interested in rejoining the Federation. The president is isolationist, but he is tired of listening to the young teenagers and the young adults, so he's like, what the heck? We'll go to Earth, we'll see what's going on at Earth. Naturally, Captain Ake, she is super jazzed and not wearing any shoes. And the War College is super jazzed because they're going to get more area to protect and more ships and more recruits. The Admiral of Starfleet, he's kind of a lullid. I don't know what to say about him. He says like 3 or 4 lines in the entire episode of relevance. And Caleb is basically sitting on the fence. He's not sure if he wants to stay or if he wants to go. A bunch of other things happen, and we end up meeting Tarima. Tarima is the daughter of the president of Betazoid, and she is ultimately going to help make the decision for Betazed to rejoin the Federation. Which brings me to kind of, I guess, a bit of confusion I had with Betazed. See, I always thought that Betazed was kind of a female-dominated planet, or at least led by women, matrilineal, matriarchal, whatever. Because every time I saw Deanna and her mother in the Next Generation, I always got the impression that they ran the show. The president of Betazed was a dude, kind of an old dude, which, no big deal. And they apparently have had this shield in place that has protected their section of space since the burn. I don't know what that means, other than to say I don't understand where the problem has been. Because the first thing that they want when they rejoin the Federation is mandatory deployment of warships in their sector. I think they said they want 6 different warships that protect their region of space at any given time. But if they've been protected by this shield for 200 years, what happened? That probably wasn't explained as well as it could have been. And we kind of jump from these diplomatic meetings to the rest of the episode. I don't think the Admiral and the President of Betazed really get more than 2 lines of dialogue before we go somewhere else the entire episode. But Caleb ends up running into Tarima, and Tarima's got this little implant on her neck that prevents her from sensing things as fully as another person in her species. I guess she's got enhanced abilities compared to everybody else. All right, that's cool. I will say that as soon as I heard that, I got instant suitor vibes from Voyager, and I wouldn't be surprised if she ends up being some sort of killer or psychopath later on in the show that has to be rescued. Admittedly, that is presuming they get a second season, and I don't think they're going to get there. But she goes up to Caleb and she says, you know what, everybody here, everybody that I've sensed, they are 100% pro-Federation. They're Federation through and through, and you're the only one that seems to have any misgivings, which matches the feelings of the Betazoids, and she wants to get closer to him to understand whether or not they should ultimately join. This was a huge point of confusion for me, because half the show and half of the world building outside the show has been that there's been no Federation for the last 200 years. That all these worlds have basically abandoned the future and gone back to scarcity-based economies, despite the fact that the replicators would still work, despite the fact that they have nuclear batteries, despite the fact that we meet hundreds of other species that have alternatives to dilithium. And they take a tour through the nostalgia goggles before ultimately opening up to one another, and she's able to convince her father to rejoin the Federation. Everybody's happy, and she decides to go to the War College instead of Starfleet Academy. The relationship between Caleb and Tarima, it really only exists to serve to set up more romantic tension later. The only function is to establish the love triangle and to preach this kind of message about activism and being involved. It doesn't really do a whole lot for Star Trek as a whole. The real question that Star Trek would attempt to answer is, what does Betazoid bring to the table? What does Betazoid need from the Federation? And what does the Federation need from Betazoid? Where in that mix do the emotional and the ethical and the logical obligations exist? So let me offer you an alternative for this episode. Think about where Starfleet is right now. The burn has just been ended. Starfleet is in the process of rebuilding, and we don't know how many of their member worlds they've actually reached out and contacted. You have a war college, which you've gone all in on, and you have a lot of recuperating worlds that are going to have all kinds of wants and needs. What does the Federation need from Betazoid? Well, first and foremost, you get skilled diplomats, a telepathic race that can tell you what each negotiating table needs, what each world leader wants to rejoin the Federation, how they're feeling about what you're saying, what they're most focused on and worried about. What can you trade to get them back on your side? If you find any spies, if you find any disruptive elements that are trying to destabilize the Federation, you have skilled interrogators that can read their mind, read their emotions, tell you what their end goals are, how to stop them, how to stop the people that they're working with. Now, this is a shattered universe. This is a group of people who don't trust each other. You have security gaps. You have diplomatic concerns. You've got 1,000 fires to put out. Starfleet should be bending over backwards to recruit as many Betazoids as possible, to the point that even if Betazoid doesn't come back to the Federation is trying to co-opt this younger generation that is more malleable, that may not have the experience to know what happened 200 years ago, like the president of Betazoid. The Federation needs people who can vet new recruits, figure out who's trustworthy. You need someone that can help you turn your former enemies into new allies. With their rejoining of the Federation, they're not just counselors. They're not just your emotional intelligence of the Federation. They are one of your best assets. In the case of this episode, we find out that Betazoid, they mostly want protection. They want a seat at the table. Reopening Starfleet headquarters on Betazoid, I thought was a good decision. In the original series, the Federation has 4 core worlds: the Andorians, the Tellarites, the Vulcans, and Earth. This sets up a 5th player. That can only be good for interstellar civilization. The character interaction between Tarima and Caleb is still good. In fact, I think it's incredibly useful. The episode kind of gets weird with opening up to each other a few minutes after meeting each other, but having Tarima talking to Caleb and realizing just what people go through when the Federation isn't there to protect them, isn't there to save them and give them kind of a better outlook on life, that should be more than enough to motivate a telepathic and empathic race to get involved again. Having her realize that, hey, if this Federation and people from the Golden Era had been there to protect people, the burn wouldn't have been half as bad. And this kind of brings me to my next point. The Betazoids have been in isolation for 100, 200 years. The social implication of not using telepathy to communicate and read other people's mind, that should have faded away. Over 200 years, since you don't have people without telepathy, the social implication would probably just dissolve and be forgotten. One of those things where you don't even realize you're being rude until somebody points out that you're being rude. And really, that's it. You can see, most of the episode just doesn't matter, but the focus should have been between what does the Federation need, what does Betazoid need, and how do they get there? That's real Star Trek, not, hey, Genesis, the Admiral's daughter, is now secretly jealous that Caleb is hooking up with, or is going to eventually hook up with the Betazoid girl. Oh. But that's all for me. Let me know if you have any other ideas how to improve this episode beyond just do it differently.
Look! There's a boy! Look!